Let me just make a few final comments. Ms. Carr has won so many awards. Her group, the Community Legal Services of Philadelphia, received a prestigious ABA award. She herself received the top award from the National Legal and Defender Association, which gave her the Ray Dennison Award. She's received Penn's Distinguished Alumni Award. She's been selected by Legal Intelligencer as one of the 50 most influential women. And I just want to mention one last thing. Lest you doubt her determination to advance the public interest, I just learned when I picked her up from the airport yesterday that she fractured her arm a few days ago and didn't tell me about this in advance of coming out. Had I known, I might have disinvited her because her doctor told her not to travel. And despite doctor's orders, she decided to come out here and speak to us. And public interest lawyers play hurt. That's what we do. You got to commend that. But please join me, first of all and separately, in thanking Dom Vetri for his great public service to the nation, to the state, and to the University of Oregon. Dom, please stand. And Dom, if you could join me up front. I just sprung this on Dom. I'm going to ask him to pass the plaque to Catherine, and we'll get used out for a photo op for the website. Could you come over here, because I think he's trying to, Dom is modest. And now, please join me in thanking our speaker who made a huge sacrifice to come join us today, Catherine Carr. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Okay then, I present Catherine Carr.
I can't say anything without my glasses, I can't see anything without my glasses. Well, thank you. First of all, I got to start. The broken arm story sounds a lot more exciting than it really is. But in sort of good Oregon tradition, it was a bicycle accident. So I actually bicycle to work, and I fell down, and they did an MRI. I've been sort of walking around with this for a long time with it hurting, and they did an MRI the night before I was to fly out, and some young doctor was like, "You can't go anywhere." But then by the time Tom picked me up, I talked to a more experienced doctor who said, "You know, we don't cast those kinds of fractures." So it sounds a lot more dramatic than it is. I can't straighten my arm, but that should be okay for talking to you guys this afternoon. I'm really, really thrilled to be here. Partly I'm glad not to be in Philadelphia after the Phillies lost last night. But this was really, I want to thank you. It was a real honor to, this is how this went. I get a phone call from some guy I've never heard of who says, "I'm out here in Eugene, Oregon, and we'd like to give you a Champion of the Public Interest Award in honor of Dominic Vetri." And I'm like, wow, and we'll fly you out to Eugene. So I'm just flattered and thrilled, and it's really I who should be thanking all of you for having me. It's a beautiful city here. I get to meet Dom. As Tom said, I share the Penn Law background. I called up a professor who taught me my first course in poverty law. We called it income security, and a professor named Howard Lesnick, who still teaches at Penn Law School. He remembered Dom, knew he was teaching. So even as Dom and I both have been at least several decades out of Penn Law School, he is still remembered there. I teach a public interest lawyering class at Penn Law School, but my real job, as Tom described, is running Community Legal Services, the largest public interest organization in Philadelphia. And just to follow up about Howard Lesnick, who taught me, at Penn Law School, they've just very recently inaugurated a public interest award at Penn Law School in Howard Lesnick's name. And I think it's just fabulous that we are recognizing a generation and a group of lawyers who spent their career doing public interest law, and that will be passing on these honors and remembering them each year. And I'm just particularly honored to be the recipient of one in Dom's name. I'm going to try to live up to the standards of dedication and commitment to public interest that Dom has set. Is Ben Albers here? Oh, there he is. And actually, you look familiar, Ben. I want to thank Ben, who nominated me for this award. Ben worked with a group called Equality Advocates in Philadelphia this summer and heard me talk a little bit, and he was the one who got me here. So I really, really want to thank you, Ben. I also want to thank all of you who do public interest internships in the summers. They make a tremendous difference for people like me and for staff who work in public interest organizations all year long. We look forward to the summer when a bunch of new energy and new intelligence and commitment comes in and helps us out with cases. You really make a real difference. There's always too much work for us in the public interest sector, and having the students arrive is a real relief and a gift. So thank you to Ben, and thank you to all of you who have done that kind of work. And I also am going to thank my husband, Louis Tannen, who's back in the corner, and who came today. Anybody who does public interest law knows that the support of families and partners, spouses, is extremely important, and Louis has been there for me, helping me raise 2 sons. He's been listening to my problems and feeding me wonderful cooking for several decades now. So thank you, Louis. I want to talk just a bit today about my career and my organization and about the joys and rewards of doing public interest work. I will start by saying that I really feel privileged to have the job that I have. I'm standing up here and getting an award for doing something that I really love. I direct one of the best civil legal aid organizations in the country and work with a large community of dedicated public interest people across the nation. And I get to spend my time thinking about how to build a better justice system for the people in this country who are the most overlooked and the most neglected. I get to do work that I care about and work that makes a difference. It's ironic to get an award, right, for doing that, but I hope I can help some of you students think about how you too can find work that you love and a career path that matters, and encourage you to follow your heart and your passions. First, I'm guessing that many of you are unclear about what you want to do as a lawyer, and I want to assure you that feeling that way is okay. Finding your way as a lawyer is really a process that will unfold, even if you're not really clear on what you want to do. I entered law school without lawyers in my family and with very little knowledge about what lawyers even did. But I had a sense that having a law degree would help me make change. I bet that a number of you started out that way as well. And sometimes you lose some of that as you go through law school. You lose maybe the same vision of what you want, why you wanted to be a lawyer. And I want you to, as you go forward, remember every once in a while stop and think about what it was that made you want to be a lawyer and see if you can carry some of that as you're looking at your career. As a law student, I didn't have any vision of where my path would lead. I never would have predicted that I would be in the job I am now. So I sometimes think that, boy, wouldn't it be nice for someone in your position to know exactly what you want to do and how you're going to get there. But if you don't worry about it. Things unfold and lead to good places. I didn't know where I was going, but I did care about things, and I did have some passions. For me, a big issue, as Tom mentioned, was equality for women. While it's almost hard to remember at this point, women were really treated very differently when I was a law student. All male universities were just starting to admit women. Women were still rare in law schools. Female judges were few and rare. As Tom said, I worked for the very first female judge to be appointed to the Eastern District of Pennsylvania Federal Court. I had my own firsts. I was the first graduate in my university in women's studies, as was a women's studies major. It was a major I made up myself. I'm the first director of my organization who was a woman, who is still a woman too. And I was attracted to law school because I met some of the few women law students at the law school when I was an undergraduate, and they were working on equal rights amendments and women's issues, and it was something that really grabbed me and excited me. And I decided to follow that interest, and I worked with a women's law organization right after I graduated, and they convinced me really that going to law school would be a path for me. Then during law school, I worked at a number of different kinds of public interest organizations as an intern. I did some civil work and I did criminal work. I decided pretty quickly that the criminal work wasn't for me. For me, it felt a little bit too much like kind of football practice of law, a lot of competition and trying to win and trying to beat the other side. But I liked the legal services work, and I gradually saw that my interest shifted from really the women's issues and to poverty issues. And certainly there's a huge overlap. Most of the people in poverty are women, right? I did the education law as Tom worked, and I got some experience doing class action litigation and policy advocacy, but that didn't feel quite like the right match for me. So I then moved into a staff position in the legal services organization, Community Legal Services, where I am now. At Legal Aid, I found that having all these clients walk in every day who were in really difficult situations with really basic needs, and finding that my skills as a lawyer really could help them out, I found that incredibly compelling. My first months, I came home from work night after night, and I lived with some housemates, and I would tell them the sad stories of the clients I met, and they were homeless, they were hungry, they were threatened with having their children taken away, they were scared and confused. And I just felt like there was so much work to do, so much need, and so much justice denied. I found I loved the legal analysis involved in figuring out the legal problems and in writing a great brief, but I also loved the interaction with the people. And they were really people on the fringes of our society who in many cases, our culture really tries to ignore. At Legal Services, I was also able to do a range of work. I did administrative hearings where I would be seeking sometimes very small amounts of money for people who had been denied some welfare benefits. And I did big class actions that had impact on thousands of people across the country. My work focused mostly on people with disabilities. I saw a lot of women who used to work in factories in Philadelphia that had closed down, a lot of whom were cleaning houses, and then were developing sort of old age disabilities and had absolutely no income until they could qualify for Social Security disability. I saw a lot of unemployed single women who were raising children alone and really struggling to survive. I'm particularly proud of a case I brought on behalf of women who had HIV. At that point, HIV had mostly been seen and diagnosed and studied in the population of gay men. And as it started to develop in women, they developed certain different kinds of symptoms that the Social Security Administration didn't recognize as easily as a disability. And we brought a class action on behalf of a national class of women with HIV and got the whole standards changed. So I had both the individual woman who came into my office, who was our named plaintiff, who had 2 kids and was living in an extremely difficult situation, had been infected by a husband who had left her. We got her money, but then we also changed it for thousands of women, sick women, across the country. I loved my work as a lawyer, and I didn't really have a vision for a next step in my career. I didn't really aspire to be a manager, and I know lawyers who came in and really, they know they want to manage something, and they want to run an organization, but it wasn't necessarily what I saw myself as doing. I knew the struggles my boss faced with constant funding issues for the organization, personnel problems, union disputes. My organization has unionized attorneys, actually, and I was in the union. But then our beloved director left, and he took a law school position in a clinical professorship, and people started coming to me and saying, "Do you know who could run this organization? It's you." And I hadn't really thought about myself in that role, but as people said that to me, I realized I did have a vision for the organization and its work, and I was ready to take on a new challenge. The job turned out to be a great match for my skills. I certainly don't love fundraising, and it's a big part of my job. It's kind of like being the dean of a law school, I think, but I can do it. And what I do love is that I'm in a position where I can enable really dedicated staff who are really committed to trying to make change for poor people. I get to enable them to do their work. I get to support them. I get to help them envision what their work should look like, strategize about it, and really try to maximize the difference we make for clients. I love thinking about what is the most important work we can do and making sure that we're not a stuck organization. I like seeing us build new projects and adjust to what's going on for the clients that we serve. So this job has worked out well for me. Well, what's my lesson? I guess to you, it's that careers will lead you in unexpected directions. But pay attention to what you enjoy and what excites you and learn from that. At the same time, do your job well. Develop a range of skills. And I don't mean just researching and brief writing and legislative analysis, but also self-understanding and people skills, good judgment. Think about how systems work. Think about how people work, how organizations work, and how change is made. Then keep your eyes and ears open and watch out when opportunities come along. My path is just one example, of course. Professor Vetri's is another. There are infinite directions a public interest career can take. Public interest lawyers do environmental law, international human rights law, juvenile justice, immigration and criminal defense, voting rights, civil liberties, the list is long. They do it in a variety of settings and fashions. As a full-time staff lawyer like me, or as a law school clinical lawyer like Professor Vetri, a volunteer pro bono attorney, or a government lawyer. But Professor Vetri and I and most public interest lawyers share something important. We followed our passion for justice, and we stayed true to a core desire to make a difference. For the professor, it was a passion for gay rights and art and teaching. For me, it was women and the poor. And for you, it may be something completely different. But it is likely what brought you to law school. And it is worth looking at closely and treasuring and honoring what you want to do. Let me tell you just a bit more about the work my organization does. We get state, city, foundation, and some federal funding. We represent low-income people who contact us in a broad range of civil, non-criminal legal problems. The problems range from simple questions about a lease or entitlement to unemployment compensation or some other kind of benefit to complex cases that we litigate for years. We have cases that last for decades in enforcement matters. Some things go on, and some will just advise somebody for 5 or 10 minutes. We help elders who are being overcharged by their nursing homes, families facing termination of their lease or foreclosure on their home in fear of homelessness, immigrant employees whose employers have refused to pay them. We help men coming out of prison who cannot find a job because of their criminal record is a barrier, and mothers who are afraid they will lose their child because of an allegation of abuse or neglect. We help the individuals, but we also look for the systemic problems behind the individual problems we are seeing. If employers are repeatedly failing to pay immigrant workers for hours they worked, we'll think about, is there a legislative fix we should pursue? How can we prevent this problem, not just for this client, not just to get his money, but how do we prevent this in the future? If mortgage foreclosure is making hundreds of families homeless and leaving deteriorating buildings on blocks in the city, should we strategize on how to change the foreclosure process in court? How to get the state to send up a fund to assist homeowners facing foreclosure? Those are the kinds of questions we ask and we think about and we act on. We try to address the problems in a way that will help both the people walking into our offices, but also the many, many people that we do not see, but who we know are also being hurt. We have limited attorneys on staff, limited resources, so we try to use them efficiently and effectively, bringing class actions if that's appropriate, or seeking policy change to have greater impact. As the years have passed, our organization has become well respected, and it becomes easier and easier to make change. People listen to us. People recognize that we are experts on poverty issues. When you think about it, in government, people change often. I have a staff at Community Legal Services that have been working on poverty law issues for over 30 years. They know their stuff. So we all don't have to, and when we litigate, we win. So now people will listen to us, they'll bring us to the table, and in many ways our work has changed to being more a voice for the poor in an inside fashion than necessarily being outsiders who are always having to sue. I hope that some of you will go into legal services work with an organization like mine or some other public interest career. Oregon has several wonderful legal services programs, and I work with Tom Matsuda, who directs Legal Aid Services of Oregon on some national issues. He's a really brilliant and thoughtful leader, and if you're interested in this, I would take some time to learn about the work that that organization does. There are lots and lots of rewards to a public interest career. You work with other people who are committed about their work. There's a real community and collegiality. When I meet a public interest lawyer from Washington, D.C. or California or even South Africa, we feel like we have something in common. We have a mission in common. And the mission is one that I think all lawyers and law students can understand. We all grow up in this country taught from our youngest moments that we are a society whose highest values are justice, liberty, and equality for all. These concepts are the very foundation of this country for which our founding fathers fought, and which we cite as justification for our domestic and international policies. We are proud of our Constitution because it has carried those values forward. We want to be lawyers because we are the professionals who can make these principles real. And yet, as I know many of you know, you only need to spend one day doing intake in a legal services office or an hour in a landlord-tenant court to see that the gap between our rhetorical promises of equality, justice, and the reality for many, many Americans is glaring. Equal justice is a sham for those without the money for a lawyer to help them avoid foreclosure on their home from a predatory mortgage lender. And equality is a hollow term for impoverished immigrant who cannot access treatment for a brain tumor, even in my city, where there are some of the most sophisticated hospitals in the world. And liberty means little to a former victim of a domestic violence who is successfully released from a drug treatment program, only to learn that her parental rights were terminated and she has no right to ever see her child again. Those are the kinds of things you see in my office. When we lawyers see these things day after day, we know that the promise of our great country is at odds with the reality for many people. And the statistics support what we see anecdotally. What kind of equality do we have when we have 46 million Americans who have no health insurance, when 1/5 of the country's children live in poverty, when study after study shows that 80% of poor people with legal problems cannot get an attorney? In our guts, we know that our system is flawed and that there are changes to be made. Public interest lawyers carry that conviction for change, that desire to make America's promises real with them every day. It keeps us going. We know our work is important and that it's crucial for our democratic values and that those values be more than just empty promises. We carry that passion for change into our work when we represent the single client in front of us and when we step back to figure out how to make change in a bigger, more efficient, and more permanent way. I do not profess that we make huge strides quickly, but it is the most important that we who believe in justice can do us work every day. At the same time that I say there's a community of public interest lawyers, I want to just emphasize that it cannot be a closed community. It's a community that we've got to grow. If the goals of public interest lawyers are to build equal justice for all, then we need everyone on the team. Striving for justice for all has to be a mainstream idea, a part of the work of every single lawyer, every single judge, and more important, every single person in this country. Legal services organizations like mine sometimes have been seen as somewhat unorthodox, non-mainstream groups on the fringe that help poor people, but that are really not central to our culture. We've got to make that change. The work for justice for all has to be the work of everyone. We need to pull in colleagues from the private bar in government and all join together to make access to courts for all a reality. The movement for pro bono is helping this happen. More and more law firms are simply not only allowing their attorneys to do pro bono work, but some are now requiring it. And I believe that as more and more private attorneys see low-income people and the legal needs they have, that the movement for access to justice and for legal services for all will be furthered. Legal services organizations are always facing concerns about funding. Most recently, with the recession, we are seeing more people come into our offices, more people calling us, more mortgage foreclosures, more predatory lending problems, more disabled people with problems, and I won't say they're more disabled people, but perhaps the claims for disability have increased, perhaps because more people are unemployed. At the same time that we're seeing more issues, our funding has declined. There's a system known as IOLTA, Interest on Lawyers' Trust Accounts, which nationally has been a huge supporter and source of funding for legal services programs. It's dependent on interest rates. And when interest rates went down, then funding for legal services went down. So at the same time we have more people asking for services, we have less money coming in. So it's been a moment of stress for legal services. So that's part of my work, and I think part of the culture's work, that we find funding for legal services, which is just like funding for the district attorney's office, that is like funding for the judicial system, that is like funding for the county lawyers. We need to see legal services for poor people as something that is absolutely core and always in the budgets. Justice Earl Johnson of the California Supreme Court has been a leader in researching how the United States' expenditures on legal services for the poor compares internationally. And he has found that other industrialized nations invest from 2.5 to 17 times as much of their GNP and government funds for civil legal services to the poor, 2.5 to 17 times as much as we do. We need to work on that in this country. And finally, I'll just say a little bit more about money, and then I'm going to take questions from you guys. Money is certainly a central theme for all of us, and indeed for the whole culture during this terribly difficult economic period. I'm sure all of you are thinking about money, and especially if you're thinking about practicing public interest law, right? You've got student loans. We know the salaries aren't so good. But And also at this moment, you got to wonder if there are jobs at all, right? First, I want to say that this recession will pass. It is temporary. The older people in the room know that these things come and they go. This one's particularly bad, but it too will pass. It's particularly bad timing for those of you who are looking for jobs next year or the next, but it's not forever. The pendulum of boom and bust goes back and forth, and if you hang in, it will change. Public interest firms and private law firms are feeling the economic downturn, but there's going to come a day when they all need more lawyers, so don't give up. One of the things about working with poor people is you realize how well off you are, right? Every day you get a reminder that you could be even poorer, that there are people worse off than you. Indeed, in my office, really lack of money overall is what defines our work. We represent people who don't have money, even people who are working. Over the years, we see more and more working poor. Of course, in the last year, we're seeing more and more unemployed. But generally, the people in our offices are working poor and still can't make it. We Our offices suffer from the scarcity of resources. We don't have enough lawyers, we don't have enough copying machines, we are always worrying about money. But at the same time that there's all those concerns about money and in the recession, I just want to remind everybody that we are still living in this incredibly wealthy country. There is lots of money around, and we just got to make sure that the money gets to the right places. Even after last year's Wall Street drama, we see that a small group of Americans continue to get richer, and policies still are designed to protect them and their money rather than to pull the clients of legal services ahead. The income inequities in this country need to be talked about and challenged. The recession may have hurt middle and upper class people with savings, but we cannot lose track of the longer term trend, the decline of income to the poorest Americans. The median hourly wage for American workers, when inflation adjusted, continues to decline, while the income of the top 1% of Americans continues to increase. We cannot let this trend towards further inequity continue. And of course, for all you aspiring public interest lawyers, salary is a big deal for you. The average starting salary for a Pennsylvania legal aid attorney in 2004, so that was 5 years ago, was $31,000. Their median debt was $63,000, and some were paying as much as $14,000 each year towards student loans. You give one of these students a couple of dependents, and they're going to meet the poverty standards themselves. After having years of sophisticated training, they end up, and working committedly to a good job, they can end up living in poverty. But there's good news. The problem is starting to be addressed in the legal services world. There's a lot of talk among legal services directors. Some of the funders have actually required legal services programs to raise their attorney salaries. So the salaries are going up. Even in this recessionary time, there's been a commitment that the loss of funds won't be taken out on staff attorneys in many, many places. I won't say everywhere. In my program, a starting salary now makes $54,000. That's a significant increase from where it was, and it's going to continue to go up. Nationally, last year, the median starting salary for new public legal services attorneys was $40,000, but again, that's going up. I think there's finally a recognition that we can't expect bright, committed lawyers to come work at what are really poverty wages. Also, there are new federal student loan rules, and I hope you all know about those, and if you don't, you might look at the Equal Justice Works website, which has some very good information about it. You want to get federal direct loans, and there are deals now where you pay it off at a certain percentage of your salary, and after a couple of decades or something, what's left is forgiven. So make sure you know about that. In closing, I just want to say a little bit inconsistently that really money doesn't matter. When you think about the work you want to do, don't worry too much about the money. In the end, what matters in one's career is the difference you can make and the work you are doing, and not what they're paying you for it. A career in public interest law will make you rich in the ways that really matter, rich in the chance to bring compassion and love to your work each day, love of justice, love of the law, and love of people. Studies now actually show that money does not bring happiness, right, or buy happiness. And if you look at the richest people in our world, our culture, look at billionaires like Bill Gates, George Soros, and what do they do when they have so much money that they can do anything they want? They start helping people in need, right? They start setting up foundations and doing charitable works. So here's my message. Skip that whole beginning business part. Skip that part where you make the billions, right? Go straight to the happiness, go straight to the giving, straight to the making change, straight to creating justice. And no matter what work you end up doing, you too can be a public interest lawyer. Whether you're working for a law firm doing pro bono, whether you're working for the government making our system work, whether you're in a law school or whether you're somewhere much more exotic, carry with you an interest and a conscious intent to use some of your talents to change some of what you don't like in the world. Follow your passion, make a difference, and have fun. Sit down. Thank you, but
Ms. Carr has time for a few questions. That's why I wanted to turn and face all of you. I know some people do have to go, and we respect that, but we probably have time for 4 or 5 questions, depending how long the answers are and the questions are. So please raise your hand, and maybe I can help call out people. Please go ahead, Paris.
Working in public interest and dealing with people who are needy, people who are poor, all day long, how do you avoid bringing that home with you at the end of the day and bringing home that sadness and misery?
Could you repeat the question?
okay, sure. The question was how, when you work in the public interest every day, you avoid bringing home the sad stories, the sadness. How do you avoid it, really living with that all the time? I will say that I think that's particularly a problem in the early stages of a career. And I think that for new lawyers, that can be very difficult. And it's something that is real, but that you learn to deal with. And I think that's perhaps partly, when I say that there's a collegiality in the profession, maybe that's part of it too, which is we help each other with it. You learn a certain amount of distance. As I said, when I first did this work, I was coming home. Finally, these housemates who I told these terrible stories to pretty much told me to stop it, right? They didn't want to hear it all the time. But you learn that there's only so much you can do, and you do a little bit of separation in a good way, I think, which avoids burnout. So you carry some of it with you, but I think people do figure it out. My organization, people talk about burnout in these kinds of jobs and people leaving these kinds of jobs. People very rarely leave my organization. People work there, some people work there for 30, 40 years. So I think it's something that you can do. But it's a real question. I think some of the burnout is not even so much the sad stories, because you can see that you can make a difference. So even though there's a sad story, you also see you make a difference. You get the thank you notes from clients. You'll get, they'll bring you, they have no money and they'll bring you a bunch of flowers when you accomplish something for them. But for me, I think generally it's the scope of what there is to do, the sense that there's so much that needs you, and figuring out how you don't feel like you can't work all the time, you can't own it all. You've got to set limits about pieces you can take on and pieces that you can't. And actually I think that's part of what my job needs to be, which is helping people strategize about what both the work we will do, but also the work we won't do, because there really is too much.
Another question, Jerry?
I'm just curious if you mind kind of forecasting what sort of impact healthcare reform have on the work that you do.
Yeah,
Whatever state it ends up taking.
Yeah, I think, I'm really not an expert on this, and I've had a few conversations with some people in Washington. Apparently, some of the way it's going right now, that there are expectations that it will be helpful to the people who are on the medical assistance Medicaid rolls, and that there will be more people covered. But I think that I think there's still a lot of concerns. What it's going to do with immigrants. I mean, one of the big groups we see are undocumented immigrants who can't get health care, and how that's going to turn out is going to be a real problem. I'm hopeful that for the unemployed, one of the things we've seen with this recession is the people who lose their jobs are laid off and then are told they can buy health care with COBRA, but you just lost all your income, and you're told that for $300 a month you can buy your family health care. I'm hoping that it's going to fix some of that. I think I think we're going to be better off, but I think there may still be some people we're going to be worried about.
Is there another question? Oh, please, Alex.
Yeah. Hi.
I was wondering how your organization, I guess how you deal with the gaps between what services you can provide and what services you can't, and how you direct people to other places that you can get help. It seems like there's often sort of this,
Right. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend that we're good at that. We, as I mentioned, you know, that when you have, no matter how many studies they do of legal services, they keep coming up with this 80% figure, that 80% of the need is not being met. Actually, that's a little problematic, because if you keep throwing money at the problem and always 80% of the need isn't met, you might as well take some of the money back, right? We have many different kinds of providers in Philadelphia, and that's probably true in Oregon. You know, you've got there's a juvenile law center, or there's some different groups, and we're not terribly great at collaborating, or at least avoiding bouncing people from place to place, and I think that's a really, really big problem. The truth is that we have so many limited resources to a certain extent that we hide from clients. So we, for instance, in my office, this is not good, but we only do intake on certain hours. You can only call certain hours on certain days, and it's a way of kind of limiting the flow of cases into our office. If you really open up and make sure everybody gets a chance at a lawyer, then what happens is you can use all your resources at that front end, just giving everybody sort of 5 minutes of advice. And if you want to figure out how you do both, give some advice, but also do some in-depth representation, then you've kind of got to limit that front end. And that's, I think, the struggle that legal services generally go through, and it's actually been a national conversation. There's some people, for a few years back, there was a big talk about 100% access, and we want to make sure that 100% of people get to a legal services lawyer. Well, if you do that, you're going to have everybody getting, 15 minutes of advice. I mean, I'm generalizing, of course. But alternatively, I think this is why I talk in my program, we think more about having a certain number of people who we're assisting and trying to use the information we get from that group of people that we assist to inform work that will hopefully help people who aren't coming in. But it's a very big problem.
I actually have one, Catherine. One thing I read about in the literature about advocacy on behalf of the poor is that class actions generally are less successful in the last couple decades. I wonder if you might address that, maybe disagree or explain why they're less successful.
I think that I would say anecdotally that that's our experience at Community Legal Services. We used to bring a lot of class actions. I mean, I'm talking about the 60s and 70s, and basically the courts were much more sympathetic. The courts were much more open. Over the last few decades, really, you'll hear people talking about this, but there's been a real effort to kind of close the federal courthouse doors, especially, that just jurisdiction and standing and all those issues have been kind of narrowed down. So it's harder to get into courts. And I think that the judiciary is more conservative about making decisions that affect large groups of people. So there's definitely been a trend in our organization. A way that's hit us also is one of the ways we supported our organization is with attorney's fees. And so a lot of these, especially class actions against government entities under Section 1983, you can get attorney's fees for the plaintiff's attorneys if you win, and that was another source of funding for legal services programs. As we're doing less class action litigation, we're getting less fees. Now, I think and a lot of the things that my organization used to solve through class actions, we're now doing more of by actually sitting down with government entities that who we would have otherwise sued and talking ahead of time about policies and changes that could be made. And I think a lot of that leverage we have with policymakers is really because we have a history of litigation. We still do some class actions, so they realize that we know our stuff, that we're likely to win, and that they're willing to talk with us. But we have much more success now really on the policy front. Legislatively, with administrations, we work well with the governor, the city administrations. We do a lot more than that, and we used to do a lot more class action litigation.
Let's thank Catherine. We all need to give a clap.
Thank you. Yeah.